Why would an animal stop everything it's doing for hours just to stand beside a body that will never move again? No food involved, no danger nearby, just stillness. An elephant family can stay together for close to 60 years. Generation after generation, the same faces, the same walking routes, the same watering holes return to every single year. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a dry riverbed at dusk. The air still warm from the day, and in front of you, a herd has stopped moving. Not resting, not eating, just standing, trunks lowered, touching something on the ground. By every rule of survival, they should walk away. There's no food here, no water, nothing to gain by staying. A young calf lingers at the edge of the group, watching the older ones, unsure of what to do with its own stillness. And ask yourself, honestly, would you expect a wild animal to remember this exact spot years from now? Somewhere in that group, an older female lifts her head, ears spread wide, and simply waits, as if listening for something the rest of us can't hear. And yet, elephants do come back. Not once. Sometimes for years. What happens in the next few minutes will tell you why science still struggles to put this into words. What actually happens is documented, not guessed at. Researchers who spend years following the same elephant families have recorded this pattern again and again. When a member of the group dies, others gather around the body, some staying for hours, occasionally through the night. They touch the skin, the tusks, sometimes the skull, using the tip of the trunk in a slow, careful way that looks nothing like casual curiosity. In some recorded cases, elephants have returned to the exact bones of a family member more than a year later, stopping to touch them again before moving on. If a channel is documenting stories like this one, following along means you won't miss the next case, because there's always another one just as strange. One field study tracked a single family group revisiting the same set of remains on 4 separate occasions across 18 months. In several recorded encounters, elephants have been seen lifting bones with their trunks, carrying a jaw or a piece of tusk for a short distance, only to set it back down almost exactly where it started, as though the point was never to take anything, just to hold it for a moment. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. If this were only about smell, why would the behavior fade almost completely once the bones dry out and lose their scent? Yet the visits continue anyway. The next remains to be examined are the ones science hasn't figured out how to explain. The explanation researchers point to isn't sentimentality, at least not in the way people mean it. It centers on a trunk behavior scientists call chemosensory investigation, which is simply the animal using thousands of sensitive receptors in its trunk tip to gather chemical information. The same way a dog reads a scent trail, except far more precise. This isn't just about picking up an interesting smell. The same elephants that spend so long with the remains of a relative will walk straight past the carcass of a zebra or a buffalo without a second glance. That distinction matters. Ask yourself, if this were pure instinct triggered by any dead body nearby, wouldn't every carcass get the same treatment? It doesn't. The behavior appears tied to recognition, not just biology in a generic sense. And elephants are known to carry detailed spatial and social memory for decades, likely stored through neural structures remarkably similar in complexity to those involved in human memory. An elephant's brain, in proportion to its body, contains a hippocampus-like region, packed with the kind of density usually associated with long-term recall, not short bursts of reaction. That's a technical way of saying the wiring for holding on to a memory for decades is already there, built in, long before any single death ever happens. What happened decades ago, in one specific case, is still one of the clearest examples on record. In 2003, in Kenya's Samburu region, researchers documented the death of a matriarch named Eleanor. Over the following days, elephants from several different family groups, not just her own, approached her body, touched it, and stood over it before eventually moving on. One female in particular returned repeatedly over several days, refusing to leave the area for long. That detail should have been the whole story. It wasn't. Because here's what researchers noticed next, almost by accident. Several of the elephants that stopped for Eleanor had no prior relationship with her at all. No shared herd, no history, nothing that memory alone could explain. So, a separate set of experiments tried something stranger. They placed elephant skulls next to the skulls of other large animals. and next to ivory that had never belonged to anyone the herd knew. Elephants ignored the other remains almost entirely, but they lingered every time, near the elephant skulls and the ivory, regardless of whose they were. That single result quietly breaks the story you thought you were hearing. This was never only about remembering a specific individual. Go back for a second to that riverbed at dusk, the herd standing motionless around something on the ground. That's not a scene invented for effect. It's close to what researchers actually watched happen more than once in more than one place. Sometimes for elephants they'd never met at all. If you've made it this far, you're clearly the kind of person who likes questions without easy answers. So it's worth sticking around and dropping a comment about whether you think this counts as grief, because people land on very different sides of that. What comes after this is stranger still, because the pattern isn't universal at all. Not every elephant behaves this way, and that matters just as much as the cases that do. First, very young elephants, especially calves under 2 years old, rarely engage in this behavior at all, likely because the social bonds and memory required haven't fully developed yet. Second, during periods of extreme drought or resource scarcity, even adult elephants have been observed moving past remains without the usual pause, survival pressure apparently overriding whatever draws them to stop under normal circumstances. Third, unrelated herds passing through an area sometimes show only brief interest, a quick touch, and nothing more, compared to the extended attention family members give. Think of it less like a fixed rule and more like a pattern that only shows up fully in one specific combination: emotional recognition, available time, and family connection all present together. Remove any one piece, and the behavior shrinks or disappears. Fourth, elephants raised in captivity, away from a natural multi-generational herd, show a noticeably weaker version of this pattern, which suggests part of it might even be learned by watching older relatives, rather than something purely hardwired from birth. There's one more layer to this, and it has less to do with grief and more to do with who leads it. Here's a detail that surprises most people. This behavior isn't spread evenly across an elephant herd. It's disproportionately led by older females, the matriarchs, far more than by young males or bulls living on their own. Statistically, a matriarch is significantly more likely to initiate contact with remains and lead a group toward them than any other member of the herd. That's not incidental. Matriarchs carry the accumulated social memory of the group. They're the ones who remember drought years, migration routes, and, it seems, which bones belong to which family line. Younger males, who typically leave the family group once they mature, show far less of this behavior once they're on their own. So the real question was never only whether elephants remember one specific death. It became something narrower and stranger. Who inside the group is wired to notice death at all? Elephant death specifically, and who simply isn't? Go back to that image one more time. The herd at the riverbed, dusk settling in, trunks resting gently on something still on the ground. What you're watching, according to everything researchers have pieced together, isn't grief in the human sense, with tears and words and rituals passed down through language. It's something quieter and, in its own way, harder to dismiss. A recognition system built around presence, scent, and touch. One that doesn't even require knowing the individual, only recognizing what they were. Maybe the question was never whether elephants mourn the way we do. Maybe it was whether we've been underestimating what remembering can look like when it doesn't come with words. If that thought stays with you the way it stayed with the researchers who first documented it, it's worth subscribing for the next one and leaving a comment on whether you think that herd, standing quietly in the dust, was simply reacting or actually remembering.